Hi everyone, and welcome to this Leisure Networks webinar focusing on volunteer recruitment and retention. My name is Siobhan McSmone and I'm a part of the Sport, Recreation and Health team here at Leisure Networks. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm recording this webinar from the land of the Wadawurrung people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are viewing this webinar from today, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the land and waters across our nation. Throughout today's webinar, we'll be going over volunteer attraction, recruitment and support, acknowledging and retaining volunteers, volunteer management systems, and also innovation and partnerships within the volunteer space. So to start this webinar, I just have a little activity to begin with. First, I just want you to have a think, why do you personally volunteer? We'll touch on this further in the webinar, but just to begin thinking and have a reflect on this now would be great. And also just have a quick think about what do you hope to achieve by viewing this webinar? What do you hope to get out of it? Before moving into attracting and recruiting volunteers at your club, it is important to understand the current trends and common challenges around volunteering. The sports sector has witnessed the impacts of a constantly changing world, including changes to the way people work, family structures, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Many environmental changes such as busy lifestyles, desire for more flexibility in sport and recreation offerings, including social and modified activities, and also constant distractions with technology are creating new challenges for sport and sport volunteering. The impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have rippled into sport with risk around return to play and volunteering. Leading on from this, some current trends in volunteering include more volunteers wanting roles that are flexible or require shorter hours or shorter term commitments. People are increasingly time poor and volunteering activities compete with greater work and caring responsibilities. Volunteering is more common outside of the major cities where population density is lower, despite participation rates for organised sport being similar across the regions. This perhaps reflects the strong role sports clubs play in rural and regional social and community life. Lastly, at Leisure Networks, we conducted a club research report that found 48% of surveyed clubs within the Barwon Region reported that there was a decrease in their volunteer numbers. However, 41% of clubs actually reported that there was no change in their volunteer numbers, so this was a really positive outcome for the Barwon Region. Understanding the common challenges and what is holding people back from getting or staying involved at your club will help your recruitment efforts and also keep your current volunteers happy and engaged. So I've just put on the slide here some common challenges to work on within volunteering at a club level. So from people looking in from the outside, a lot of the time at clubs, they can see that there's a small group of volunteers or committee members who are doing all the work around the club. They're doing too much, which then puts off people from wanting to get involved in volunteering or being a committee member because they feel like that's what's going to be expected of them and that's how much time and effort they're going to have to put into the role as well, which we've seen that people obviously with changing times and work commitments and everything like that, that they are looking for smaller time commitments and smaller roles. So that can really put people off if they can see that there is just a small group that are doing way too much. So also we have here committee roles growing out of control, which kind of goes hand in hand with that. Some committee members are underutilised. There's a reluctance to hand tasks on from the committee or within the committee. There's also differentiations between the doers and decision makers at clubs. And lastly, one of the common challenges we see is the attitude that this is how it's been done for years. So kind of overcoming some of these challenges can really go a long way in attracting volunteers at or to your club. Okay, so now that we've had a look at the current trends and common challenges around volunteering, we can take this information and kind of move into what attracts people to volunteering, why would people want to take up a volunteering role at your club, why do people volunteer, or why do you volunteer, is a good thing to think about as well, because often the reasons, maybe you got involved in volunteering is the reason that other people get involved in volunteering as well. So here we're just going to have a look at what draws people to volunteer. So we have the responsibility and trust that is placed upon them, the feeling of being listened to, and also solving problems as a team, working as a team, and that team morale. The praise and recognition that you get from volunteering, the skill development that comes along with that, and also the social interaction and connection. Some other reasons people volunteer is a means to stay connected within their communities, or to meet new people, or to make a positive difference within their community, to gain new skills and experience, to support their family members in sport, and also to meet new people. So in understanding and having some examples of what attracts people to volunteering, clubs can then create an environment that fosters these values and create a culture that attracts and engages volunteers. So after attracting people to want to volunteer at your club, we then move into recruiting these people into the right volunteering roles at your club. So some tips or pointers in volunteer recruitment starts with identifying what you need as a club, and then asking and recruiting the right people is the next step. So make a plan around the particular areas you need volunteer support to cover, and then prepare a job description for these roles. So this is where the importance of a job description for volunteer roles really comes into play, and the importance of these becomes really clear. So each volunteer must have an understanding of what exactly the job entails, how long it will take, so hours per month, hours per week, and what support they'll be given along the way. So if people can see, the time commitment they have to give, see the breakdown of tasks and duties they need to complete, and have confidence in knowing what is required of them for the role, they are much more likely to commit to fulfilling the role and have the ability to fulfill that role really well. So consider also breaking down larger club roles into a number of smaller roles. So each of those smaller roles will have a clear role description and time commitments. So we've seen a lot of clubs take up this approach and have great success in fulfilling the roles, and increased volunteer engagement, satisfaction, which then also leads to volunteer retention. So that's just a tip on how it is asking to recruit more volunteers, but also in the long run, those volunteers are going to be more engaged and more likely to stay within roles at the club, because those larger roles are broken down into smaller roles, and there's not so much of a big time commitment. There's more flexibility, which is really meeting the needs of the volunteers. Next, in recruitment tips, we have, so what is your best recruitment strategy? Is it recruiting in pairs, which kind of relates to breaking down those larger roles? Is it recruiting internally, or is it maybe looking externally to your club in your recruitment drive? Next is target people and ask directly. So having a knowledge of the skills of the people within your club is really important here. So knowing what their jobs are, or kind of what field they're studying, is really important. Because then you can target them and ask them directly, hey, we think you'd be really great in this role. Have you ever thought about maybe stepping into the role or applying? You have the great skill set to match, is a really great way of going about it, because once people are made aware that you think they're going to be great in the role, they're more likely to apply. So just an example of this is maybe maybe you know that someone in your club is studying media and communications, or they're really interested in that space, and maybe asking them to take on your club's social media. It's just a really good way of getting people to step into roles that they maybe haven't considered before. And then also, which kind of leads into looking outside the box. So looking outside the box, it could be chatting with universities or other local kind of community groups and things like that, where volunteers might take up a role from there. So universities have a lot of students that need placement experience or a place to develop their skills and knowledge, so sporting clubs can be a really great place for that. The next step is supporting and acknowledging volunteers so that they are more likely to feel engaged, connected and fulfilled within their roles, leading to retention of volunteers and lower volunteer turnover, which is the great aim for many clubs. Volunteers who feel well supported and truly valued are more likely to continue their involvement as a volunteer. So supporting volunteers can take many shapes and forms, but I've listed some here of really high importance. Firstly is ensuring that you have a volunteer coordinator as part of your club structure. So volunteer coordinators play a vital role within the recruitment of new volunteers and providing ongoing direction and support once volunteers are engaged. The focus of the volunteer coordinator is to ensure that every volunteer feels valued, is well informed and is confident in their ability to undertake tasks and responsibilities to fulfill their role. Volunteer coordinators can be responsible for taking new volunteers through an induction process, providing volunteers with relevant training, policies and procedures, and matching appropriate skill sets and interests to volunteer positions. Having a volunteer coordinator within your club that provides great support and recognition creates an environment that promotes retention of volunteers and volunteer satisfaction. Next up, we have mentoring and shadowing opportunities. So this is a great opportunity for incoming volunteers to gain a hands-on understanding and experience of what they will be completing. Clear role descriptions is up next, which we kind of went over in detail earlier. Providing adequate training and ongoing support is really important in supporting your volunteers. So asking your volunteers what support or training they feel they need to perform their role well. So it might be something that they need to just brush up on, or just a new skill in general that they need to develop. This kind of leads to one-on-one check-ins. So this is a space where you can sit down and ask these questions to your volunteers, but it also gives you a chance to provide one-on-one personalized praise and recognition, which goes a really long way in supporting your volunteers. Here, I thought it'd just be a great time to pause and have a think about what strategies or incentives does your club use in order to acknowledge and thank your volunteers. Maybe just a time to think about what ones work well, or if there's any new strategies that you could be adopting. So volunteer support and then volunteer acknowledgement really go hand in hand. So volunteer acknowledgement and reward helps to improve volunteer satisfaction and retention. People want to feel appreciated for their efforts. If they feel undervalued, or if their efforts are underappreciated, they are more likely to discontinue their time volunteering at the club. So thanking, recognising and acknowledging the wonderful efforts of volunteers doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to be expensive. There are many simple things that your club can do that can go a long way in recognising volunteers and making them and their efforts feel truly valued. So up on the slide here, we just have some successful ideas that clubs have implemented. So in talking to clubs, these are some ideas that they've used, that they've found really worked in acknowledging and thanking their volunteers. So up the top there, we have social memberships. So maybe if the volunteer isn't a player, a social membership is a great way to go, or if they are a player, maybe they get a free registration. So that's a really great way to say thank you. Next, we have providing food and drink at committee meetings. So this is just a simple one that can make committee meetings feel more relaxed and more of a fun environment, and more of a place where people actually want to go to them. Next is a volunteer social catch-up. So this can be at the club, or it could be at a venue outside of the club. Just a great way to kind of build that team morale within your volunteers at your club. Next, we have life memberships after 10 years on the committee. So obviously volunteering on the committee for 10 years is a massive achievement. So a life membership provided by a club is just a great way to really acknowledge that for years to come. Next, we have a volunteer dinner at the end of a season. So also just another great way to make sure you're dedicating some time to say thank you to your volunteers. And lastly, we have one-on-one volunteer thanking, which we have gone over earlier. We're just going to have a quick look at managing volunteers, because we know that having a planned approach to managing volunteers leads to a better experience for the volunteer, enhanced satisfaction, and therefore improving retention of volunteers. Well supported and well managed volunteers are more likely to feel confident in fulfilling their roles. So I just have up here quickly some of the main structures or systems in managing volunteers. So volunteer coordinators is important, which we touched on a couple of slides ago. Succession planning, so making sure that there are plans in place for the next lot of volunteers to come through, and then also reiterating the importance of having clear position descriptions for all your volunteer roles. It's important for clubs to be thinking innovatively about the way volunteering can take shape within your club, making sure your club is keeping up with demands of the current world and the current trends. Innovation can be really exciting, and it can bring new possibilities and new opportunities to your club. I want you to have a think about some ways that your club can continue to move forward and be dynamic in the way of volunteering. But firstly, here are just some innovative trends that we are currently seeing within the club volunteer space, just to get you thinking. So obviously we have new ideas, so breaking down larger roles into smaller roles, job sharing, things like that. Next, we have online volunteering. So with COVID-19 and the pandemic and everything like that, we've seen a shift to a lot of people working from home, a lot of online meetings, a lot more use of devices like your phone, tablets, laptops, everything like that. So it's about thinking what roles can be done in an online sense that maybe they don't have to be done at the club or in a face-to-face sense, can be moved to online. Someone from a remote location might be able to help with doing it. It's just a new way of thinking and kind of future-proofing those ideas. And lastly, we just have junior volunteers, so getting juniors involved in volunteering from a younger age so they can really have it ingrained, they can see the benefits of it and know what's coming, what kind of tasks they might like to do, or what roles they might want to step into kind of in the future years. So that's also another really great idea. I just wanted to quickly highlight that there are a number of organisations that your sporting club can look to partner with either in your volunteer recruitment drive. They can assist in finding volunteers, or actually in the support of volunteers. So those organisations are places such as your local council is a great place to start, local volunteering organisations, or their websites, community groups, and also universities. So universities where students are looking to fill placement requirements or develop skills for their resumes. So to put all this information from the webinar into one nice neat little bundle, I have my top 5 tips for volunteer recruitment and retention. So number 1 is to ensure you have a volunteer coordinator as part of your club structure to provide ongoing support to volunteers. Number 2 is to develop role descriptions for each volunteer position so that people are aware of exactly what they are stepping into. Number 3 is be flexible with roles, including the timing of involvement and structure of larger roles. Tip number 4 is to generate incentives for volunteers. This could be reduced fees or awards. And finally, number 5 is to continuously recognise and thank your volunteers. Okay, we're coming to the end of this Leisure Network's volunteer recruitment and retention webinar. To wrap up, I would really like you to pause and just have a quick think or jot down 3 main takeaways, learnings, or actions that you could implement at your club around volunteering as a result of this workshop. Okay, just before we wrap up, I just have some really helpful websites and resources for all things volunteering. So that's recruitment, support, retention, and volunteer opportunities. They're all listed on the slide here, so go and check them out if you would like. Thank you so much everyone for tuning in and viewing this webinar. I hope that you all have taken something really useful from this. If you'd like any further information, including resources, tips and downloads, please remember to visit www.clubhelp.org.au. Thanks again everyone.